Hello and welcome. Hi, I'm Dave, and today we're looking at an interview question that was the only question for the entire interview. Now, it's hard to imagine an interview with only one question, but I'm going to provide the solution today just in case you're ever asked this question. This tutorial was inspired by this popular Reddit post, 10 questions I've been asked more than once over 6 technical JavaScript front-end engineer job interviews. And you can Google the full post and see all of the description, but the main thing we take away from this is algorithmic. The very first one listed in the post is define a function that returns n, or x number of lines, of Pascal's triangle. And it says this question was the entire interview. Let's look at Pascal's triangle. And with Pascal's triangle, you can see patterns within the triangle. Let me make the triangle just a little larger so we can really view this colorful version here. And you can see it starts with a 1 at the top, and all down the left side it's the number 1, no matter how many rows to the triangle there are. And also all down the right side, there are 1s. So as each row ends, it also has a 1. Now notice the second color of numbers here, the light yellow color. So the number 1 here is the sum of what's above it. And the number 2 is the sum of the 1 above it and the 1 behind it. And the 3 is the sum of the 2 above it and the 1 behind it, and so on. And this pattern repeats. So when we look at the third column over here in the darker blue, we could say the 3 is the sum of the 1 and the 2 above it, and the 6 is the sum of the 3 and the 3 above it, and the 10 the sum of the 6 and the 4. So we see the patterns here. So the question from the interview said, given n or x or whatever you want to label your variable with, given whatever number of lines are required, make a Pascal's triangle like this. And so that's the information we have headed in. Now let's go ahead and make the triangle. First we'll do it in the console, and then we will create one in the DOM that looks a lot like the one you see here. Okay, we're in Visual Studio Code, and you can see I've already started the JavaScript with no more than an event listener added to the document that calls this init app function once the DOM content loaded event fires. And here's the init app function, and inside the init app function we're going to call our Pascal's triangle function, and it's going to return what I call a Pascal's triangle array. So it will have an array that is full of arrays. Actually, it will be an array of arrays that one array will inside, one of the inner arrays will count for one of the rows in the triangle. So this outer array would essentially be the stack of rows. Okay, so let's start with our function now that is Pascal's triangle. We'll say const Pascal's triangle, and for the parameter, let's set it equal to rows. And let's set this equal to 3 as a default. So if it's not provided, as we don't provide it above, it will default to at least 3 rows so we can get an idea of how the triangle works. You'd have at least 2 to have the triangle, but they would all have just the number 1 in them. So that's not exactly what we want. We could go back and of course look at the triangle as well for reference. But right now, let's go ahead and say if rows for some reason is less than 3, let's just set rows equal to 3. So we never have a triangle with fewer than 3 rows. Now let's define this outer array. This will represent the full pyramid or triangle, so the stack of rows, if you will. And this will be what I call a stack array, and we'll set it equal to an empty array. And then we'll define an iterator with let, and I'm going to set I equal to 1, not 0. And I will explain why in just a second. And then we'll have a while loop. And with this while loop, we'll say while I is less than or equal to rows. So that means since we didn't start at 0, we want it to go ahead and iterate one time when it is equal to the parameter that is passed in. So this is our first loop, and as we're building this pyramid, or this Pascal's triangle, we will have a loop within a loop as well. Within this loop, we'll want to increase the iterator so we don't have an endless loop. And when the loop completes, we'll want to return the stack array that we have defined. Besides that, we could go ahead and start in on the other values we need for the next loop. So let's define the row array. So we've already acknowledged our stack array will be an array of arrays. So now this row array will have all of the values in each individual row of the pyramid, but we have to start out with it as an empty array. After that, we'll define another iterator, and since we've already used I'll use X here, and I'll define it with 0. And then I'm going to define a row value variable. Now we need to start our next loop, and we'll say while X is less than I. So we know we need at least 3 rows, so this will continue to iterate through 3 times. The first time it comes through, I will be 1, and we just want 1 square at the top of our pyramid. The next time it will be 2, the next time it will be 3. So it will continue to build rows that are larger. So we build from the top down. Now inside this loop, at a minimum, we need to, of course, increase this iterator as well. If not, we would have an endless loop there. Now let's think about this pyramid. We have a pyramid that starts with 1 at the beginning of each row and also ends with 1. So we want to say if X is false, essentially 0, or if X is equal to I minus 1. And we have to say minus 1 because I started at 1 and not 0 there. So when it is equal to what would be ending our row, we want to have the row value equal to 0. So we'll say row value, I said row value equal to 0. We want the row value to be equal to 1 at the beginning and the end of each row. But after that, we'll have an else where we handle the other definition of our row value. And we won't get there yet, but for now we'll just say else. And let's go ahead and set the row value to else for here, just as a temporary, so we can see what's happening. We'll just set it to yeah. And we know we're going to replace the yeahs. Now the row array will push in each row value as this loop iterates. But then after that is finished, we need to break out of this loop and push in to the stack array, the row array, which would be our row for our pyramid. And so the stack array is the full pyramid, and it's full of rows of the pyramid. The row array holds the values of each row, but right now it's going to hold 1 at the beginning and the end, and the string yeah in between. So let's go ahead and log some of these things to the console now. So we're pushing in this row value, and then we push in the row array. So let's at least console.log each row we have, which would be the row array. And then at the very end, before we return the full stack array, let's go ahead and log that stack array, and we'll check the values in the console. Now to do this, I'm going to use Live Server. It's an extension you can get in Visual Studio Code. Search for Live Server, and you'll see Live Server available by Ritwick Day. If you don't have that installed, you want to install that. From there, back in the file tree, I'm in the HTML. I can right-click and choose Open with Live Server. Now I'm not doing anything with the DOM yet, so we don't see anything except a white page until I get into DevTools over here. Now we've got a 404 because of the fave icon, but that's no worries. I can clear that out. We can reload, and we'll see what we get. And so our first square of the pyramid, and we can refer back here, our first square is 1. Our second row has a 1 and a 1, and our third row has a 1 and a 2 and a 1. Let's see if we got that. So we have a 1, and then a 1 and a 1 in the second row, and then in the third row we have a 1 and a yeah and a 1, and that is because we didn't attempt to put the 2 in there, we just put in the yeah string. And now at the end we log the full array, the Pascal's triangle array, which is the stack array in our code, and it contains all 3 of these inner arrays here. And that's what we see. Okay, going back to our code now, let's get back into the JS file, and let's go ahead and put in a row value where we have the yeahs. We can see how that much works so far. But the row value is going to take just a little more thought here in our else block, in our inner loop. Remember, this is the inner loop, and then we have the outer loop. This loop builds each row. So what we need to do here for the row value is a little more complicated than just the word yeah. We're going to set it equal to, and I'll put a parentheses around it, parse int, and have a stack array. Now we're referring to the outer array, the full pyramid array, and that is because we need to get values from the previous row, and that row has been saved into the stack array already. So we set this to equal to I minus 2. And after that, we refer to x that is in our inner loop, and that will be the previous number, not only above, but to the left. So when we look back at our Pascal's triangle, when we're here at the 2, this is the previous number, and now 1 to the left as well. So up 1 and back 1. And that's why we had to start with a minus, or I'm sorry, not a minus, a 1 instead of a 0, because you can't subtract 1 from a 0. If we were going backwards in our calculations, we needed to start with a number 1 at a minimum as we iterated through this loop, because we're already subtracting 2 from I to get back to that 0 value. If that makes sense. If not, we should log these out as well. So we will log these out, and maybe it will make a little more sense, but I'm going to go ahead and put in the other value here, which is parse int, and it's going to be much the same as the first one, but I'll change just a little bit so we get the right value. It's I minus 2, but then it's x minus 1. There we go. So we get both values. Now let's go ahead and log these values as well so you see what we're putting in. So we'll have a console.log here, and the first one we'll put in is this value, and then right underneath it we will put in the other one. Copy this over. We'll save that. Now let's go back to our code and see it in DevTools. Reload. Here we go. So now you can see we've got a 1 and a 1 logging from JS 20 and 21, and then we get our array here that's 1, 2, 1. So what we're doing is saying 1 plus 1 in that equation. Let's go ahead and increase our call to our function just a little bit so we can see some other values go through that. So what we had here was a default of 3, but we can pass in another value that will override the default. So let's go ahead and say 4. We'll save that and go back to our DevTools. And now you can see as we log those other values, it's 2, 1, 1, 2. And then we get the array of 1, 3, 3, 1. So if that doesn't make sense, refer to the triangle once again. And here's our 1, 3, 3, 1. And so we get this 3 by adding the 2 and the 1. And we get this 3 by adding the 1 and the 2. So hopefully that's making a little bit of sense to you in the patterns. So once again, let's go back to the code and finish this off so then we can create the DOM version. Okay, let's get the console log statements out of here, but of course feel free to leave those in so you can make sense of the values if it's still not clicking for you. I'm going to go ahead and break this down just a line here so it makes a little more sense, or if it doesn't make sense, at least it's a little easier to read. We'll leave it like this, with this value plus and that value, and we say we should still get the same result. I'm going to leave these console log statements in for now because we want to refer to the array values for each one. We've completed our Pascal's triangle function, and now it will return the full triangle or full pyramid in this array that we see returned up here. So after that, we want to create what I call a DOM triangle function and pass in the Pascal's triangle array. Now we need to create that DOM triangle function. Okay, let's scroll down underneath the Pascal's triangle function and we'll define DOM triangle, and we'll set this equal to an arrow function that accepts an array. And the first thing we'll do is just grab the main element from the DOM, document query selector, and grab the main element. After that, the array that's passed in is our Pascal's triangle array, and we'll say array for each. And remember, the Pascal's triangle array is an array of arrays. So we'll say for each sub-array, we're going to do something. And what I'll do is define a row and set that equal to a build row function, and I'll pass in the subarray, and then we'll take the main that we defined and we'll say main append child, and then we'll append the row that is built. So that's our DOM triangle function. So now you can see we need this helper function that is called build row. So underneath that, we'll define build row. We'll set this equal to an arrow function that also accepts an array, but this is the subarray that we're passing in. So now we'll define a row, and this will be document.create element, and we'll create a div. And then we'll take the row and grab the class list, and we'll add the row class. Now I've already provided CSS and a basic HTML frame that I'll have in the repository for this tutorial that you can view on GitHub, and the link will be in the description. Okay, for the array, the subarray now, we'll say for each, and this will be for each element in the array is fine, or we could say for each square, because we're going to define a square here, so it's much easier to just say element up above, or EL for element. And here we'll define document create element and create another div. And before, where we had the row, now we're going to have the squares that make up the row. So we've defined the square, and now we'll say square.classList.add, and we will add the square class, and then the square text content is going to equal the element value, which would be the numbers. And from there, we're going to say row append child and pass in the square. Now at the very end of this function, we need to return the row, because that is what is expected above as we get the row back, and then we append each row to the main element. Now after we save that, it is complete. So let's go ahead and take a look at Chrome and look at this. And here you can see our triangle is defined. Now it's a little small. Let's go ahead and put it at 100% here. Here's our small Pascal's triangle. Let's go ahead and change the values just so we can get a larger triangle now. Let's make a triangle with at least 8 rows instead of just 4. And after we save that, we will go back and view that in Chrome. And you can see, you need to make it just a little smaller to fit to the screen now. There is our full triangle or pyramid that has the same pattern that we witnessed before. And hey, look over in the console and you can see how this triangle grows here as well in the values. And the full Pascal's array, Pascal's triangle array that is passed to the DOM to build this on the left-hand side is logged down here on line 31. So there's your solution. If you have questions, please let me know in the comments. If you have other ways to solve this problem, I'm very interested in that as well. Thank you for watching and subscribing. I always appreciate it and look forward to it. And I will talk to you guys again very soon.